Let me start by asking you, if you had grown up in this country rather than in Europe at the time that you did, living through both the Nazis and the beginning of the Eastern Bloc and communism, how do you think your political views might be different today?
Well, I really can't answer that question because it didn't happen.
Well, speculate.
I think that in some ways I'm more sensitive to certain developments than I might be if I'd grown up in this country. You know, when I hear President Bush say that those who are not supporting me are with the terrorists, or when Ashcroft at the USA Patriot Act said that those who oppose the Patriot Act are giving aid and comfort to terrorists, I hear alarm bells. Because it does remind me of this kind of either you are with us or you're against us, that you have got to suspend your critical faculties and be patriotic. And that, I think, is a threat to an open society, because an open society depends very, very fundamentally on open discussion and a critical attitude.
When you came to this country after being educated in England, what was in your mind? What did you expect to find? What did you want to find? And have you found it?
Here. Well, I chose the West because I sought for freedom. But to be frank, I came to America to make money.
Well, this introduces a point which I myself wanted to raise. I mean, on the one hand, you are a man who has been quite accomplished in this task of making money. And on the other hand, you've been extremely accomplished in giving it away. And in one book that I read that you wrote, I think your last one, you noted that Henry Kissinger said that nations have no principles, only interest, and you are sometimes said to have principles and no interest. But indeed, there is quite a contradiction between making money and philanthropy and political involvement such as you engage in. How do you see these two things as reconciling in your mind?
Well, first of all, in order to give money away, you've got to make it first, unless you inherit it. So I don't see any contradiction. But let's say I was concerned about the world and before I became a billionaire. So when I became rich, and I actually set up my foundation long before I became a billionaire, that goes back to 1979, when my investment fund reached $100 million, and my wealth was about $20 million. And actually making money was a tremendous strain, very risky, very strenuous. And I wondered, why do I do it? And that's when I set up a foundation. Mm-hmm. So I think that, the two things, making money and giving money away, are all inspired by the same sort of set of ideas.
Well, that's interesting. Let me ask you to elaborate a little on that. I mean, I would imagine, well, let me ask you, do you enjoy the making of the money as much as you do the activities that it enables you to engage in once it's there?
Well, I used to enjoy making money a lot. And it's a very exciting activity, it's very challenging. But it didn't give me the kind of satisfaction that I have in giving it away. I mean, I had one particular experience that I sort of referred to when I was under tremendous strain, and I thought that I was going to have a heart attack. And I thought, what a shame to die, making money. And
well, we're glad you did make it.
you know, now, in the things that I am engaged in, I'm actually willing to put my life at risk. And I think it makes me feel much more complete.
Obviously, and we talked about this a little earlier, it could be said that you, in a way, by entering the world of electoral politics, are an oligarch.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, an oligarch on the Democratic rather than the Republican side. What's the rebuttal to that suggestion?
Well, first of all, I like the philanthropolitic. That's a very good term. You know, there's been a lot of discussion of my sort of political donations, and the fact that I've been supporting and continue to support campaign finance reform. Now, I think that my activities are fully in compliance, not only with the letter of the law, but also with the spirit, because the campaign finance was basically designed to deny access to special interests. And these organizations that I support, they were there before I started supporting them. They were deliberately not regulated by the campaign finance. And the Federal Election Commission reaffirmed this just recently. So that is, in other words, I'm complying with the letter. But I think that the purpose was not to take money out of politics, because that's an impossibility, but to deny special interests access. And if you support these organizations, you get no access. It doesn't get you anything. And because of that, it's very difficult to get support for it. I'm trying to get other people to contribute, and it isn't easy.
Well, you get paid back, I suppose, in political currency, a currency of being a citizen. Do you consider that to be a legitimate
Well,
interest?
I'm doing it out of principle. And so I think that this is in accordance. Now, nevertheless, I think that in view of the experience with this election, the issue should be re-examined. Is the present regulation good? Is it good to separate, let's say, soft money from the party? Or should, in fact, soft money be allowed to go through the party? And should there be more free access to media? I think that actually giving more free access to media, which does not interfere with the First Amendment, because after all the airwaves are a public good, would be a much better way to reduce the influence of money. In Brazil, for instance, they had elections, and a very large amount of airtime was allocated to the candidates. I think was a very good system. So I wish that that would be considered in this country.
Well, that raises the interesting question of whether we in this country don't need some more robust form of public broadcasting, non-commercial broadcasting.
Yes, yes. And NPR, for instance, one of the few institutions left in our media that is really giving good information.
And would you, are you inclined to support something like NPR? I mean, do you think it plays that critical role?
Well, I'm not financially supporting NPR, but I support it in principle.
Yes, principle and interest. The world is now really intertwined in a way as never before, and global markets, such as they are paramount. Do you think this system has enough integrity to survive, given the weaknesses of sovereign structure and nation states?
No, you have currently some kind of a distortion in globalization, because you've got global markets, but political arrangements remain firmly based on the principle of sovereignty. And because of the greatly increased interdependence, what goes on inside other countries is of vital interest to us and to everybody in the world. So what kind of regime you have in Afghanistan, let's say, has a bearing on our security. And that poses an unsolved problem. What do you do about internal political developments in countries? Because most of the poverty and misery in the world today is due to bad government of one sort or another. Repressive regimes, corrupt regimes, failed states, and so on. What do you do about that? And that is the great unsolved problem that we need to address.
Well, talk about that. I mean, what is the right balance between sovereignty on the one hand and internationalism and maybe world government on the other hand, which, as you well know, is a real antichrist for many people in this country and elsewhere in the world?
Well, I think the principle of sovereignty is the prevailing principle, but it is becoming modified because there are some universal principles that begin to limit the concept of absolute sovereignty. So I think if you look at the sovereignty is sort of an anachronistic or a slightly atavistic idea of goes back to where you had kings and subjects, and the kings ruled over their subjects. And then, in the French Revolution, the king was killed, and the people took possession of sovereignty. And that's modernity. That gave rise to the nation state. But the elected or non-elected governments very often abuse the sovereignty that belong to the people. And in that case, there is a need for the international community to intervene. And that concept needs to be elaborated. It is slowly being developed. There was a report which argued that there is a responsibility to protect, that when the people are abused by their own rulers and human rights are abused, that there is an international responsibility to intervene. That there was a declaration in Warsaw in the year 2000 which established the principle that it is in the interest of all democracies to help the development of democracy in other countries. But this is a principle that is an empty statement, like so many principles. But to breathe life into it, I think, is what is now needed. So I think this is the direction that we ought to move, and I think the United States ought to lead that movement. However, this administration has led us in a very different direction, because they act on the belief that international relations are relations of power and not law, that international law merely serves to legitimize whatever power has accomplished. And since we are so powerful, we have a right to impose our will on the world. And that, I think, is tremendously dangerous, because in fact we are very powerful. And this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If the most powerful nation on earth is guided by that principle, that's the principle that's going to prevail. And then we are really going back towards a less civilized world.
And do you see any real prospect in the near future that Americans will understand this world as you would like to see it? And moreover, I might ask, Why is it that something that is so self-evident to you and to many others is not self-evident at all to so many?
Well, I very much hope that we are a democracy, and we can judge our leadership in the elections. And that's why I'm arguing that we have to reject what this administration has done, particularly after September 11. So this Bush Doctrine, which basically is built on two pillars. One, that we must have maintain absolute military superiority globally and in every region of the world. And second, that we have the right for preemptive military action. If you combine these two, you see, you really have a world of two levels of sovereignty. The United States, whose sovereignty is sacrosanct, and the sovereignty of the rest of the world, which is subject to the Bush Doctrine of preemptive action. It's like Orwell's Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Mm-hmm. That is, I think, where we have gone wrong. And if we now reject that, then I think we can undo, we can treat the events of the last few years as an aberration, and we can resume our place in the world. Mm-hmm. But if we endorse it, because after all, Bush was not elected on that doctrine. Mm-hmm. He was elected on the basis of a humble foreign policy. Now, if we now endorse this new doctrine, then we have to take the consequences. So we have a real choice, and it is clear to me what the choice should be. And I think it's tremendously important, and that's why I have made this sort of my project for this year, to try to...
And how do you analyze the well springs of this political fundamentalism, which in many ways, as you've pointed out, and by the way, George has written a wonderful book, The Bubble of American Supremacy, which is a very concise and I think nicely argued alternative vision of how America can be in the world. But where do you think this sort of fundamentalist impulse that has now bled over into politics arises from? And is it more extreme now, in your experience, at this point in our history than, say, 20, 30, 40 years ago?
I definitely think that it has become dominant, and it has been carried too far. Now, you have various kinds of fundamentalism, sort of allied in the present government. You've got what I called market fundamentalism. In other words, a belief in free enterprise without constraint, because you can rely on the invisible hand of the market to bring about equilibrium. So that was market fundamentalism, and I was a critic of that. But then you have got religious fundamentalism, and now you have this belief in American supremacy. And that, I think, this is sort of the neoconservative, the project for a new American century that was formed in 1997, and then advocated invading Iraq in 1998. That, I think, is a dangerous new addition, because as long as you advocate competition, unrestrained competition in the commercial field, that's one thing. But if you advocate competition in the military field, that, I think, is very dangerous for world peace.
So in a sense, we end up with fundamentalism counterposed to fundamentalism.
Well, you have a sort of an unholy alliance between these various fundamentalist forces. You also, of course, have a degree of continuity in the government, because you know, not everybody in the government is of this ilk. And you certainly, in the State Department, you basically have continuity and a much less ideological view of the world. It's around the Defense Department that this particular school of thought is concentrated, and that's where I think the real danger comes from.
Now, we know you're really no supporter of Bush, but let me ask you before we get to the Bush question, what's right about what Bush has done?
There are. And, you know, I was, for instance, and remain a supporter of the Millennium Challenge account. Or he's done quite well on fighting AIDS, even contributing to the Global Fund for AIDS. So it's not all bad. It's only that there is a sort of a group within the government that gained the upper hand after September 11. And because the critical process was suspended, they could get their way. And this is what led to the invasion of Iraq the way it happened.
And you don't think it's correctable, given the elasticity of the current administration? The only remedy, as far as you're concerned, is to see them voted out?
No, I think it is being corrected to some extent. I mean, because the Bush administration has turned to the United Nations to assist in creating a democratic government in Iraq, because it hasn't got the legitimacy to do it, because we are an occupying power in Iraq, and no government that we install would be a legitimate government. And now, with the elections looming and the need to get Iraq off the front burner, the Bush administration actually is correcting its mistakes and is turning to the United Nations. And I think it could actually, I mean, it will be a very painful process because of the tremendous ethnic tensions. And if you have a democratic solution which gives the Shias their rights, the Sunnis are going to resist it and engage in terrorism, or rather guerrilla warfare. So there's going to be a lot of trouble yet. But there is a way out, and I hope it will be successful.
You know, it strikes me, though, as the world can ill afford to have American presidents have such a steep and repetitive learning curve. When Robert McNamara was here, I asked him at dinner, quite frankly, I asked him if he thought he would be a better leader now than when he was Secretary of Defense, and he said, by all means. Yes. And then I said, do you think we can afford to give people like you the opportunity to learn the lesson of a failed war in order to revise your view of the world? And he thought for a while, and he just shook his head, and he didn't answer. But this seems to me is the challenge.
Well, you can't avoid it. This is one of the, let's say, the penalties of democracy and changes in government. I remember very well when Kennedy became president and met with Khrushchev in Vienna, and Khrushchev sized him up and said, this is a naive guy and I can do what I want, and then imposed the division of Berlin, and we had the Berlin crisis. So Kennedy also had to learn the hard way. I think this is part of the
perfectibility of man.
Well, and then if you remain, if you were to remain, let's say, in England, where you have a different system, and Margaret Thatcher remained prime minister for 10 years, she got carried away by her success, and eventually overstepped the mark also. So I mean, there is no perfect government. So we are always bound to make mistakes.
So at heart, you are fairly still a true believer in the democratic process, given some ups and downs, that it ultimately can clarify itself.
Well, it's as Churchill said.
Yes.
But
tell everybody what Churchill said.
No, well, you know that it's the worst political system except all the others. No, but in the end, an open society depends on a well-informed electorate that is, let's say, exercises reasonable judgment. And in that respect, our open society is now endangered in ways that it wasn't before. Because there is, and this is appropriate to a school of journalism, that there is a kind of an Orwellian truth machine operating in this country. And it's a very strange phenomenon because, of course, it's not new that information and facts should be twisted. They always are in the political process. And Orwell saw the danger of propaganda 50 years ago. But when he was talking, when he wrote 1984, he was referring to a ministry of truth in a country, or in an imaginary country, where the ministry controlled all the media. Here we do have free media, and nevertheless, there is a way to twist facts and move opinion.
Now will you all join me in thanking George for coming here? Thank you, George.